Yeah. All right, we're going to get started with the next session. We're running a tight ship here. It's time to go. So Matt and I are from the program committee, and we're moderating this series of sessions. So we're here to introduce our next speaker.
Our next speaker is Will Smart. He's a senior solutions architect at Yubico, here to talk about FIDO's new tricks for passkeys on security keys with an update on CTAP 2.1. Take it away.
All right. I don't need
Give him my call.
Thank you. All right. So a little bit about myself. I'm a senior solutions architect at Yubico. I came in from U.S. National Lab, sort of where we had all the identity management problems of a federal organization, a private company, and an educational institution. And smart cards were king. Since coming to Yubico, I've spent a lot more quality time with FIDO 2, which is a lot of fun because FIDO 2 is still evolving. And that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about sort of what is CTAP, which you probably heard a little bit about this morning. We're going to do a little terminology, and then we're going to move real quick to what's actually new. And then we'll talk about some things that are technically new, but they're not going to seem new. So you've seen different representations of this probably all day. The only real important thing to take away from this slide is that CTAP is right in the middle, right? So CTAP is how the client or the web browser is going to talk to the security key to allow that security key to provide the passkey, right? And CTAP 2.1, which was published all the way back in the summer of 2022, is the first major update to the CTAP 2 standard since it was published. And it contains a bunch of new features that are focused on making security keys, specifically, easier to use for organizations and individuals that either can't use a synchronized passkey or they just don't want to. So a lot of organizations have compliance needs that prevent synced passkey use. Some have security needs, right? So this is a great time to talk about these features now, 2 years later, because now all of the platforms sort of support this stuff. You can buy security keys off the shelf with these features, and relying parties are starting to roll these features out. So this is sort of the format that I'll be using a little bit. I'm going to try and compare these features in sort of a nutrition facts sort of way. So it'll help you to understand a little bit, like at a glance, who the feature is for, what the feature is intended to do, what happens when you try and use this feature and the support isn't there, and then whether or not the relying party even needs to support it at all. Some of these features are just supported by the platform. Some of them actually need the relying party support. Right, and then I'm also going to add some information about where these things are supported, what part of the FIDO either authentication or registration process it applies to, where you can go to read about the feature, and then how you can test it out. So, new features in CTAP 2.1. These are brand new. The first one, and like by far the most asked about feature at Identiverse this year, is enterprise authentication. This is a sort of asset management, really, feature that was added, and this builds on top of the privacy-preserving direct attestation that we heard a little bit about this morning. And this will actually tell you the serial number of the security key that was used when you authenticate or register, actually only when you register. And so you can selectively de-anonymize security keys only for a specific relying party. This support is only necessary when you register the security key, and you don't have to do anything when you authenticate, right? What else do I need to say about EA? Nothing. EA is great, but again, only a sort of asset management feature, right? Don't think about EA as a security feature. Next up, we've got a couple of PIN-related features. The first one is PIN change on first use. And this is exactly what it sounds like. Before the first time you use a PIN, you have to change it. This is the same as, it's the same flow as when you get an email and you have to reset your password, right? They'll give you a temporary password and you'll have to reset it the first time you use it. This is the same thing except with the FIDO PIN. Operations that don't require a PIN, like if you're using a security key as a second factor, will work as normal. No worries about that. But you can't list credentials or delete credentials without changing that PIN. And this is really great for enroll on behalf of scenarios where you have some sort of agent or a help desk assisting people and setting that initial PIN, handing them a key with an initial PIN, and now you can go and have some sort of assurance that the person's going to change that PIN to something meaningful, something that they can remember. The next one up is minimum PIN length. And minimum PIN length is a mechanism to ensure that the PIN is always how do I want to say this? This gives organizations more flexibility than just relying on the FIDO standard minimum PIN length of 4. It provides a mechanism to set that PIN length and then for certain relying parties to read that PIN length back and get that PIN length, the minimum PIN length that was set during registration. Because minimum PIN length is ratcheting and you can't reduce that minimum PIN length without resetting the key, you as an organization can be sure that that PIN will never drop below that minimum length. Let's see. Right, so this is another feature that's only used during registration. You're not going to see this during authentication, but it's always enforced. One thing I will point out here is that if it is unsupported, you're going to see a really bad user experience on the client, right? Because your client is going to say, bad PIN, and it isn't a bad PIN, right? There's some other condition that needs to be satisfied. So this is like a real edge case to watch out for. Next up, we have a couple storage-related features, and these allow you to add information that needs to be accessed with the credential, actually on a security key. The first one is called large blob storage, and in the FIDO context, a blob is just any chunk of data that is attached to your credential. These blobs aren't processed by the security key in any way, usually not even processed by the browser. And this is just 1 to 4 kilobytes of storage that's shared between all the credentials on a security key, right? It's a pool. And usually people use this for something like an SSH certificate. Anything that really needs to be accessible before authentication or has to be accessible in situations where maybe you're not going to be able to look up some information online, like if you're in an isolated network or during some sort of outage, right? And then if you try and use this where it isn't supported, you're just not going to get any data back. There's no real concern here. The next storage-related feature is credential blobs. And this is a lot smaller pool of storage, but it is per credential. So you have 32 to 128 bytes of storage for whatever you can fit in there. The intended use of these was for an SHA hash, which is why most implementations give you multiples of 32 bytes, because that's the size of the hash. And again, this is for conveying trust about maybe a root certificate for a domain or something like that and attaching that to the credential. There aren't really any concrete implementations that we can point to. There's no real like, hey, most people use it for this because it's not used very frequently. But it's there and support is on a lot of these keys. This is protected by the PIN, but it's not encrypted in any way. So please don't put PII in there, please. And again, this is another situation where if you're on an unsupported platform, it just won't work. You just won't get that data back. The last sort of new feature we're going to talk about is always require user verification. And this is another one that does exactly what it sounds like. This is going to put your security key in a mode where it's always going to be asking for user verification, whether the relying party asked for that or not, right? So this is great for compliance for things like FIPS 143. FIPS 140-3 says every time you use your credential, you have to provide some sort of user verification, some sort of PIN entry, right? And this will ensure that your credential is always used in that compliant way. One thing to note here is that if you are mixing sort of username-less or passwordless flows with second factor flows, this might have some rough edges if you're on a platform that is not supported and you try and use one of those second factor flows, because your key will ask you for, or the key will require user verification, but if the browser doesn't support this feature, it doesn't actually know to ask you for that PIN and communicate that PIN to the security key itself, right? So you can definitely fall down there. The good news is that it will always fail in a way that's compliant with your security policy, right? So that can definitely have some rough edges, though. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to make it a little bit harder for the folks that are helping me present here and take any questions on like the new features here.
We have one online already. In the context of endpoint device authentication, when will CTAP support cross-device authentication flow for Microsoft WebView 2? I feel like this is not really in scope for the session, so we might want to. You're welcome to answer it, but
yeah, I have no visibility into that.
Yeah.
But if anyone knows when these things will be supported, please let us know.
Yeah, just come up to the. I guess I'll just say Edge WebView 2 supports anything that the platform does. So I'm not sure I understand that question. Anyway, good.
So the question I have is, you mentioned about like CTAP 2.1, especially the serial number during registration, right?
Yeah.
So is that the focus is to really like understand the supply chain attack, like in the sense of, for example, if the UB keys or the security keys are distributed by an enterprise, you want to make sure those are the only ones allowed. Is that the purpose of that, or is it something different? I just want to know more because I'm in the process of doing that.
So the question is essentially with enterprise attestation, where we can deliver the serial number, sort of what is the use case around that, right? Yeah. So enterprise attestation allows you to include that serial number information in the registration and only to a very small list of trusted domains. There's a couple ways you can manage it. You can have your security key vendor burn that list into the security key. You can have the browser, if you're on all managed platforms, you can have the browser manage that. And that does do a little mitigation of risk around security, supply chain. It's really about if you are worried that someone is going to take an off-the-shelf authenticator and use it instead of the one that you handed them, that's where you would use enterprise attestation. It doesn't really tell you very much about the security guarantees in the key itself, That is very well covered by regular attestation, right? Direct attestation. So this is really only, that's why I describe it as an asset management feature, right? It really doesn't make it more secure inherently, but it gives the organization that's purchasing these keys just one more little bit of assurance that the one that they sent out and meant for the user to use is the one that they're actually using.
Yeah, I have a follow-up.
smart cards, correct? That was the inspiration for the feature.
A lot of these features, I don't know if you can sense a theme, but a lot of these features are making FIDO a little more smart cardy. Is that a word? But yeah.
Yeah, I have a follow-up on the
Sure.
same one. So if it is going to be like more, an attestation, the other thing which I want to really like understand is when you have a YubiKey, is it like, I assume like it's for all the models, right? Especially FIDO editions. That's where my interest is more on the biometric, the bioseries FIDO edition. Is that also for that?
So,
and then you,
well,
yeah,
this
go ahead.
feature specifically, and what we're talking about today, is only FIDO 2. There's other kinds of attestation that other security key vendors and manufacturers do. Definitely find some of the Yubico folks, and we'd be happy to answer that. But that's like a whole nother talk, which I really want to do next year.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, keep them coming. Because the rest of the features are really boring, so I want to get all the Q&A in first.
Yeah, another question about enterprise attestations. Does it require any specific client configuration to get access to this serial number?
There's two ways to do it.
Yeah.
So the question is, what client configuration is required for enterprise attestation? So there's two ways to do it. One is you can go to your manufacturer and say, hey, I would like these relying party IDs burned in to this key. Those are unchangeable. You can't even read them back, right? If someone finds a key on the street, they're not going to know it's company.com key. They're just going to know that it's an enterprise attestation capable key. And when you do it that way, there's absolutely no client requirement other than that it supports that feature. The other way is called platform managed. And platform managed, you put Chrome into a special mode, and you give Chrome that authority to say, these are the trusted domains. And that's only for like extremely well-managed like client PCs, right? Those would be your internal PCs. If you want this feature to work on unmanaged devices, you got to get it burned into the key with the manufacturer facilitated, I think it's called. So.
Got another enterprise attestation question. So
Go for it.
Is this only for physical keys, or would this work for?
So all of this that I'm talking about today is only for physical keys. None of these features are really available in synced passkeys. A lot of them aren't even really appropriate for synced passkeys, like a synced passkey. You can try and tell me that you want me to change my phone PIN when I use my synced passkey. I'm going to tell you no, because that's my phone, right? So there's other ways of managing those things. This is all for physical security keys.
So on the mobile side, like if it is a company-issued device, can we?
Yeah, that's between you and your MDM and however many people you have managing that MDM, right?
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. There's no more questions on this. I'm going to move on to the super boring stuff. I say super boring because a lot of this stuff has been around for quite a long time, but it's actually now officially in the spec. The first one is credential management. And this is the only way that you can actually list credentials that are stored on your security key. So if you have like a ton of discoverable credentials on your security key, and you decide that, hey, I don't want to, I don't use this account anymore, right? Or I'm done with this test account, I can delete this credential off the security key. Credential management is a hardware vendor agnostic way to do that, right? Notably here, Windows does not have their own API for doing this. You have to use a third-party application on Windows, and you have to hit the consent button on the administrator screen to get that, right? You need to have local admin to do this management on Windows. But on Mac OS, this is built right into Chrome, right? Biometric enrollment is another of these features where it's vendor agnostic. So you can use your the Windows security screens. You can use Chrome to do this. You can use any of your own familiar platform dialog boxes to do this. You don't need to use a specific security key vendor's software, right? So again, pretty boring. This one is notable because it's supported on Windows 10. And we're not going to see very many more changes on Windows 10. In fact, I think this is the only CTAP 2.1 feature that's supported on Windows 10. And even though it's going to go end of life about this time next year, I think we'll be dealing with Windows 10 for quite a long time, right? And then that's it. You now know all of the interesting CTAP 2.1 features that are now available on security keys. This stuff is out there now. Go on and test it. A lot of it is a lot of fun and solves some real problems. So, if anyone has any other questions?
Yeah,
Now's
like
the time.
3 minutes for any other questions. Do you want to talk a little bit about why enterprise attestation protects the serial number in those contexts and why that's not available to everyone?
Sure. So unlike PIV, FIDO was created with privacy in mind. So when you create a FIDO credential, your relying party can't track you just through that credential, right? I can go to Microsoft and create an account, and I can go to Apple and create an account, and there's no tool that they have to say those two accounts were created with the same security key. Even if those two organizations collude, they can't say, it's definitely you, right? So that's a sort of inherent part of FIDO, and it's something that is completely mind-blowing to organizations that are used to PIV, right? So enterprise attestation is that sort of halfway, right? You can get that individual tracking if you paid for the key, but if you didn't, you don't know it from a random key bought off the shelf, right? So
Now we do have questions. So that was a filler.
oh, perfect.
Taking credential management, there was a mention that it's not natively supported in Windows 11. If Rubicon Authenticator app is available, is that a workaround, or is this a different credential management?
Yeah. If your device has an app that helps you manage credentials, that's great. That's what's important. The challenge for deployments is that that has to be run as admin, which if you're on a lockdown workstation, that is not fun. Nope. We probably have time for one more.
Okay. So the same question related to the same one, the credential management. If you go back to the screen, like you were showing about deleting a passkey. So when you delete, so the only way to delete a passkey from the security key without resetting. So if you list the list of passkeys and if you delete from the back end, it will not delete from the front end, right? So is there any, I don't know whether it's applicable here, the question, but is there any way to delete the passkey from the front end?
From the relying party?
No,
You're saying if
from
you
the
delete
browser.
if you delete it from the relying party, can you delete it off the security key?
From the browser.
Yeah, so if you start on the relying party, the signals API is that that Matt talked about is what you want. If you start on the authenticator and start deleting stuff, you're on your own.
Part of the challenge with the signal API would be by nature of security keys, the user may or may not have it plugged into the machine. And if the user doesn't have the security key plugged in, the browser may time out trying to reach that security key because the user never plugs it in. So that's just a part of the ecosystem and the way the signals API can work, where it's a fire and forget kind of signal. If the user has it plugged in, the browser can right away talk to the security key and work with the security key to delete that credential for that website. But if the security key is not plugged in, it may remain around.
Okay, so let me put it another way. Like,
But I think we're at time, so we can definitely catch this. Yeah.
All right.
All right.
Thank you, Will. So there is a speaker room where you can actually ask questions, and it's also lunchtime, so you can find any of the speakers at lunch. I'm sure they'd be happy to.